powerful intro, isn't it? Gives you maybe just a little bit of a sense of I am. Let me tell you, standing up here on stage, feeling it vibrate, knowing that that tomb was about to be open, because I've seen this video before, it was kind of... Remind me of this verse. It's been my favorite verse for a while. It says this: "For behold, he who forms the mountains and creates the wind, declares to man what is his thought, who makes the morning darkness and treads on the heights of the earth. The Lord, the God of hosts, is his name." Amos 4:13. I have the privilege of kicking off our I Am series. Before I do that, I think it would be a little bit amiss for me to not say thank you. I think I first spoke with you guys about 6 months ago. It's been about 6 months that we've been here. And when I looked out over the faces that day, there wasn't a lot of faces that I recognized. And yet today, I can look out and call people friends and acquaintances, and more than just I know their face, but I know names and I know stories. I've been able to weep with some of you. I've been able to pray with some of you. I've been able to have dinner with some of you, and it's just been a great 6 months. So thank you for opening up your hearts to me and my family as well. We really appreciate that. We weren't part of the celebration last week either. We were, I don't know where we were. Oh, I remember now, sorry. My daughter's like, you visited me, if she's watching. It's like, we went to Ohio, and yeah, right? It's like, things get wrapped up in your head, but it's fine. But man, all of the things that we could celebrate, I looked at that banner and read all of the things that you guys are celebrating, and we could fill that up if we really wanted to. I think if we were honest, each one of us could fill that up. If we really took a look at what God has done and what God continues to do. And man, when I think about I Am, it wasn't an easy task to think about, what do I talk about, the greatest of all time, literally, in like 40 minutes. So I'm hoping to give you kind of a taste of that, but I'd love for you to meditate on that, not only this week, but in weeks and years to come, because often I think of God and I think about who he is, but I don't necessarily attach the phrase I am and really dwell on that. And as I have over the past couple of weeks, it's been kind of amazing as God has opened up so many things. So before we look into the scriptures, I want to kind of take us back. Many of you probably know this, but the first couple books are in chronological order in the Bible. And the first one is Genesis, and I want to lead us up to the story to make sure we're all on the same page, because Genesis starts by the creation of man. We get the fall of man shortly after that, and then right at that moment, we see God already kind of bridge into there this thread of redemption that he's going to play out through his entire scriptures and then throughout our entire lives in verse 15 in chapter 3. Shortly after that, we get the flood, and we have Noah and the ark and all of these things, and then we have the Tower of Babel, and then we get into the patriarchs. We have Abraham comes onto the scene, and what does God do with Abraham? He makes a covenant with him. A very interesting covenant, because Abraham really doesn't have to do anything. He just has to continue to be who Abraham is, and hopefully he gets a little better. And we can see by his life that maybe he does, but he kind of makes the same things happen, time and time again, and it gives us a really good encouragement, because if that guy can be used, then maybe we can too. And then he goes on to Abraham's son, Isaac, and his son, Jacob, and he remains faithful with the covenant. And then by the end of Genesis, we see them being taken out of their land and brought into Egypt, because that's where Joseph was, and that's where all the food was, and that's where God had said, this is where you're going to be. I don't think at that time, if they would have been told, by the way, you're going to be here for over 400 years, that they would have been like, oh, I want to go. I don't know if at that time they would have known that pharaohs would have switched their mind about who these people were and started to see them as a good resource for just slavery and slaves, and hey, you can do all my work since you're living in this land and we don't know you. I don't know that they would have agreed to it if they would have known that at some point in time Pharaoh would have looked at the Israelite people and said, wow, they're getting pretty big. And talk to the midwives of the Israelites and say, hey, by the way, if you have baby boys, go ahead and kill them right away. And it was so neat to hear in that spot in Scripture where the midwives then, in their hearts, they said, Well, that's fine that you told us that, Pharaoh, but we fear God more than we fear you. And that's a very powerful statement after 400 years of what seems to be God not doing anything. But in those 400 years, God was doing something. He was raising up his people. He was creating a nation within a nation in a safe place. And then he was going to start to unfold his plan to them, and that's where we're going to pick it up. So if you guys want to turn in your scriptures, feel free to do so. We're going to look at the end of Exodus chapter 2 first and pick up the story there. And at the end of chapter 2, in verses 23 through 25, and it says this: During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came to God. God heard their groaning. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And here's a beautiful verse. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Just the same way that God saw his people then and God knew his people then, I want to make sure you understand today that God sees you and God knows you. God sees you and God knows you. And it's not in this creepy way. It's not like a peeping Tom outside your house like, oh, I think I see him, you know. No, this is a God who loves you deeply. This is a God that has seen you and known you since the beginning of him, which doesn't have a start. He sees you and he knows you in such an intricate way. This is a creator who didn't just create and then say, okay, see what happens. We do that sometimes, don't we? Like I was making chocolate chip cookies a couple days ago, and I had one egg and I needed two. So I'm like, what do you substitute for an egg? Some of you people might be like, well, you could do this. I didn't know. So what do? You Google it, right? So I looked up on Google. It's like, you can use applesauce. I'm like, fantastic. I have applesauce. And I'm like, not sure how this is going to work. I'm going to sit back and see what happens, right? Because I don't know what's going to happen. This isn't God, though, doing that. This is God who's created us, who sustains us, and he's an intricate part of his creation every single day. Every breath we take, every step we take, he's there and he knows it's happening. And for some of you today, you have that question mark in your head, though. And while it is an encouragement and it soothes you, there's also that part of it like, but God, if you see and know what's happening, why aren't you doing something? I want to take you back to our story. Don't you think the Israelites probably said that as well? For maybe 400 years? God, you made a covenant with us. Where are you? What are you doing? And that's part of the beauty of I am. That's part of the beauty of who God is that within that he can still be and act very powerfully and know where he's at. But it begs us to ask this question that we need to ask. If he sees and he knows us on such a personal and deep level and sustains us, do you know him? Do you know him? Truly know him? And I will say this, the more I find out about him, the more I know him, the more that I feel like I know him, the more awesome he is, because I realize that it's just the tip of the iceberg. And man, I'm so glad for that, because if we could truly get a grasp of who he was, I don't know if I'd continue to worship him. Would he be worthy of all of my praise and honor and glory that I could give? Probably not. So it's a hard question, because sometimes people say that they know him, and they bank it on their parents knowing him or their grandparents knowing him, or, yeah, I know stories about him. This isn't just knowledge about him. This is a true, heartfelt knowledge and a know him. If you allowed him to come and saturate your life in such a way that you bleed Jesus, and I don't think we'll ever get there, but I'm for sure want to try. That leads us into continuing and looking back into the scripture. So at this point, we're poised to see God start to reveal himself to his people. So let's go ahead and pick up in chapter 3 of Exodus, and we're going to read the first 14 verses together. Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. He said, Here I am. Then God said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. He said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and I have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their suffering. And I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Egypt out of Egypt, bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. Then Moses said to God, If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. He said, Say this to the people of Israel. I am sent me to you. I am sent me to you. Powerful statement. Let's take a look at this. What happens first? Moses sees a bush burning that's not actually on fire, and he's like, I should probably go check that out. You think? But how often does God put stuff in our lives and he's saying, hey, go check that out, and we're like, it might be uncomfortable. Anyway, he comes to Moses, and what's the first thing that Moses does? He does what any of us would do. I don't think you know who you're talking to, God. That's not me. I don't think I can do that. And God says, I don't think you understand, Moses. This really isn't about you. This is about me. See, I'm going to be with you. This isn't about your skills and your talents and all of the things that you do, although I gave those to you and I'm going to be using those. This is about me showing up to my people because I have seen them and I know them and I hear them and I need to do something about it. So I'm coming to do something about that, and I'm going to send you. And then Moses says, well, okay, so you're the God of the fathers, blah, I get that, okay. But if they ask me what your name is, what should I tell them? He says, well, tell them I am sent you. This made me think of I am because oftentimes we use that phrase, don't we? Like if you said, well, who are you? I might say I'm a father. And that statement in itself might lend you to think about certain things about me. You might be like, okay, I wonder if he's a good father. Maybe he's not a good father. Like nothing in that statement would tell you that I am or not. I might have a trophy at home, from my kids that says number one dad, Whether how true it is, we don't know. Or I might say something like I am a pickleball player, and some of you are like, oh, pickleball. Some of you are like, oh, pickleball, okay? Again, where, right? So we want more from that often. So then I might offer you more. I might say, well, I'm a father of 4, ages 12 to 23. This gives you a host of a lot more information. One, probably means he knows how to change a diaper. Maybe he's not very good at it, but he probably could. He's had to deal with some talks, hopefully about birds and bees and all the like. He's maybe had to deal with, teenagers in that stage and, parents can, yeah, okay. But again, it doesn't necessarily say how good I am. It just says that that's true about me. Or I could say that I'm a level 5.25 pickleball player, and some of you are like, wow, he's really good. Others are like, I don't even know what that means. And other people are like, I don't think he's that good. And guess what? You'd all be right. It's all good to have all of those things. We question those things. Why? Because if you get to a certain standard, by the way, 5.25 is like pro level. That's not me, okay? But you get to a certain level and people are like, well, I need to challenge that then. Like you can't challenge the fact that I'm a father of 4, but you could challenge the fact that I say I'm at a certain level. And if we think about going back into our text and we think about what God is saying, he's not giving anything beyond that. He just says, I am. It's like, oh, yeah, he is. But what does it mean? What does it continue to mean? Well, let's take a little forward glance, and I'm going to use some liberties here because not all of this is in the text, but I think about Moses going to the leaders of Israel, and he's sitting down with them. He's like, hey, guys, I brought you all here today. You probably remember me. I killed the Egyptian like 40 years ago. Anyway, so I'm here. I was sent to lead you up out of the land. You can, like some of those guys in there are like clapping, whooping. They're like, yeah, we're going to celebrate this. And then there's that one guy. You know the guy, okay? And he's like, Moses, like, that sounds great. Like for 400 years we've been asking for this. And like just yesterday I was talking to my wife and my kids and it's like, I really want God to show up. And now you're here and it's like, you're not God. So like, who sent you? And I think this is an extremely fair question because they feel like they haven't heard from God for 400 years. They've been in a land that profess other gods. So they ask him like, well, who is it? Who sent you? And Moses is feeling good because he has the right answer. He goes, I am. I am sent me to you. Notice he didn't name another God's name. Why? Because he isn't another God. He is the one and only God. He is, I am. End of story, period. That's it. There's not something greater. There's not something, there's a ton less. He is, I am. He's at the top all the time. He doesn't shift from that spot. He doesn't go away from that spot. When you think you're at the end of your rope and it's like, do I have enough to continue? I am. It's not about you, it's about me. When you get a diagnosis, I still remember, I didn't know this was coming. I still remember about a year ago when I was walking around and I got I think it was a text from my mom that said, hey, Dad's been diagnosed with dementia. Some of you have had those types of news. Some of you have heard the word cancer. And you wonder, I don't know what to do. And it's God is standing there saying, I am. This isn't about you. This is about me. There's such a simplicity to it. There's such a uniqueness to it. And yet often we doubt it. And I think I know why we doubt it. It's been something that I've been toying with in my mind. See, our mind knows these things about God. Our mind says this is who I am is, and our heart has all of these emotions. And when our mind doesn't line up with what our heart is feeling, we start to have this chaotic moment in our lives, and we start to wonder, well, is God who he says he is? God, I know that you can heal this, so why aren't you? God, I know you can do it this way, so we're going to deal with some of these things today, but I wanted to set up this idea of I am. And this idea of I am is such a huge one. And I want to get into two main pieces of this to kind of whet your appetite of who this is. And the first to say is this: I am denotes who God is in himself. I am denotes what God is in himself. And the first thing that came to mind when I thought of this, and actually I think I read it, so I don't have all these ideas by myself, that God is self-sufficient. God is self-sufficient. What does that mean? He doesn't need us. It's the beauty of it. Like God doesn't need me to do anything for him. He could do it himself, but yet he wants to. He desires us. He is self-sufficient. Everything he needs and has and will continue to have, he generates within himself. He doesn't need anything else. If he's hungry, he can feed himself. If he's tired, he can give himself rest. Anything and everything he needs is self-sufficient within him. And the other big one I want to talk about today is this idea of being immutable, that God is immutable. And for some of you, you're like, immutable, that's a really cool word, man. I don't have no idea what that means. It means that he doesn't change. And let me say it better. He can't change. See, the idea of doesn't change lends itself to the fact of, well, that means he could if he wanted to, but he can't. He can't change, period. Let's look at this from the opposite side of that. Let's pretend that he could change. We would wake up one morning and pray and wonder if he's still listening. We would be sharing his love and his grace and his mercy with a friend or with a stranger, and we'd have to wonder, is his love and mercy and grace still a thing? Is he still accepting people into his kingdom? Has he still died for all of the people, or did he change his mind that this guy isn't good enough? Has he changed his mind on me? I would sin, and I'd wonder if his grace is still sufficient. Do you see the beauty in the fact that he's immutable? That he can't change, that he won't change? So that we can trust him, so that we can rest in him, so that we can have peace within his presence. It goes back to this mind and this heart thing, and it's like we can know for sure that he is here, and we can then somehow get our heart to feel that, yes, God, I understand that this is part of your plan. I just don't understand it. Because there's a simplicity to it that doesn't mean he's simple to trust and simple to follow. That's not what it means. In this world, though, where things do change, I'm so grateful that he doesn't. But yet, I think if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we want him to. It reminds me of a famous quote by Voltaire that says, in the beginning, God has created man in his own image, and man has been trying to repay the favor ever since. God put within us part of himself. He imbued his image within us, and yet oftentimes we're asking him to change because we want to feel a certain way. Another famous quote, well, it's probably not as famous because you've probably never heard of Matthew Richards, but our mind works like a hammer and a chisel, forming the real Jesus into a creature of our making. And I forgot to put the final part of the quote up there, so I apologize, but it goes on to say, carving out what is uncomfortable and adding enhancements to please our desires. There's so many false gospels. Some of the false gospels start in our minds. There's a false gospel going around that Jesus wasn't preeminent, which means Jesus wasn't from the beginning. That at his birth, that's when Jesus began. And it's like, that is so untrue. There are so many false gospels, and some of them are very easy to pinpoint and easy to identify and say, yeah, I see that one. That one's, But so many of them are so subtle. This is a pretty big topic, and there was a part of me that's like, I don't know if I want to bring this up, but I think about the LGBTQ topic. Let me be very clear that the Old Testament and the New Testament are very clear that acting upon homosexuality is a sin. Then it begs the question, though, then why are churches today so divided? If it's so clear, it's because we want to make God to be something that he's not. We want to make it to say, well, God is love. And if God is love, what does that mean? He loves each and every one of us. And I would say that's absolutely true. But do you know what he hates? He hates our sin. Let me be very clear on this too, though. People that are struggling with homosexuality, that sin sometimes is a little bit easier to pinpoint and look at and say, I think that guy probably struggles with that because he's dressed as a woman. I think that guy might struggle with homosexuality because he's holding hands and kissing that other guy. Sometimes it's really easy to point out the sin in other people's lives, but can we man up today and say we have sin in our lives that separate us from the fellowship of God as equally as anyone that's struggling with that? See, when I grew up in the church, we were very legalistic, and sometimes we hold on to those tendencies because we're trying to be holy and be set apart, and I get that, and I love that. But there's not a sin that ostracizes people from the grace of God. There's not a sin that shows people the door to the church. And that's where some of the places have gone. So then some of the other ones say, well, I'm going to go on the opposite side of that and just accept them for who they are and not ask them to change. And that's not what Christ asks us. Christ asks us to change. We're the ones that are supposed to change because he doesn't. We are the ones that are supposed to try and figure out, okay, if God is love, but these people aren't looking like they love God, like what am I supposed to do with that? I don't know, but can we go to the foot of the cross and try and figure it out together instead of pushing them out the door, lead them to the foot of the cross where they belong so that Jesus can do the work that he needs to do not only in their lives but in my life? You guys remember the quote, love the sinner, hate the sin? How about love the sinner, hate our own sin more? When we can get to a place where we can say everyone is equally deserving of God's love and the fact that none of us deserve it, and yet, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Oh, thank goodness. And that's hard sometimes. I've looked at people that have done some horrendous things and wondered, God, how can you love them? Yet in some of those same moments, I can look at myself and say, God, I've done some horrendous things. How can you still love me? And yet he does. He sees us and he knows us in such an intricate way. Begs the question of, what are you doing to be an access point to that love for others? Some of us shut down that access point when we get into an uncomfortable situation. See, in those moments that we become uncomfortable, God is saying, I want to be used in you. I need you right now. Because as much as God is self-sufficient, the incredible thing is that he uses us to be his hands and his feet. And it's so glorious when we do it kind of right. It's unfortunate when we get it wrong. But it ties so well into the other main point for this morning, is that is I am denotes what he is to his people. I am denotes what he is to his people. And we've talked about some grand ideas of who God is, and man, there's grander ones. The beauty of this statement is that God is also Abba. He is also our Father. He is also the one where if we're just having the worst day ever, that he calls us to be near to him. He is an intricately delicate, immense part of his creation and wants you to know him, to be intricately attached to him, to be able to call him Father, and to understand exactly what that means. I don't think we'll ever get to. It reminded me, I know of a couple that have adopted a kid within the past few years. And one of the big things that they're really struggling through right now is the idea of what does it look like to be a good parent? What does it look like to be a good parent? And you have the parents on one side thinking that they're doing a pretty good job, and they probably are. Are they making mistakes? Absolutely. You have this kid on the other side who wants parents. And if you think about how they could come together, man, they're going to have all the same ideas as far as what it looks like to be a good parent, what it would feel like to be a good parent, the love that it has, all of those things. And yet the parent on the side also has the ideas of, yeah, but sometimes I can't do what they feel is going to be best for them. Sometimes I can't give them everything they want. Sometimes I can't make them feel fun and excited in this moment because there's stuff that needs to happen. And obviously the kid, and it doesn't necessarily have to be adopted to feel this way, they kind of sometimes feel like, well, they must not know and must not love me and they don't care about me, and you get this collision, right? Isn't that the same that we deal with our Heavenly Father sometimes? Where God knows He is, I am. He knows everything about everything. Whether I agree with Him or not, He knows, and He knows everything about everything. He's going to do everything for His purpose. And yet here I am acting like a child sometimes saying, well, God, if you would just do it this way. God, if you would do this, then this would happen. And He's like, But you don't understand, if I don't do it this way, then this person won't see me. I was reminded of a lady in my past congregation about a year ago or so. I'll probably have the time frame way off, so if they're listening, it's fine. But she called the staff office one time and she goes, "Hey, can you pray? I was just taking an ambulance to the hospital for a heart attack, and I was able to share the gospel with all these people on the ambulance and stuff. Can you pray for them?" And I'm like, well, yeah. Can we pray for you too? Like, that's where I want to get. And then she calls a week later and she's like, "Yeah, I got to go back in. They're going to do some tests, but I have cinnamon rolls for all of them and I want to pray with them again." And it's like, what is going on? This person is getting it sometimes, and I would say that all of us get it sometimes, but it's like, God, how can we do that better? See, because God doesn't want to be the fix. God wants to be the source. God is the source. Let me give you an example of this in my life. Excuse me. Early on in marriage, when I first had my college degree and I started making the big bucks, you guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But I started to get a lot of money, what I considered at that moment a lot of money, which meant I could buy a lot of things. Woo! And I could get credit cards with high limits, and I knew I could pay them back later because I was making a lot of money. This is great. Pew, pew, feeling good. God is giving me everything that I need, right? Fast forward at 5 years, you can probably figure out that, we had some debt that was bad. So I pray because I'm a Christian, right? So what do I pray to God? God, you know where we're at. I need you to get me a new job. I need you to get me more money. Maybe you can do this. Maybe you can do that. God, I need you. Now that I've messed up, I need you to fix it. Isn't that what we do? And don't get me wrong, God can fix it. See, that's some of the struggle that we have, isn't it? Like if we would have a conversation like, sometimes my ankle hurts a little bit and stuff, and it's like I limp around, it looks like it's not bad. God could fix that just like that, right? My dad's dementia, God could fix that just like that, and it's like, well, then why doesn't he? And we struggle with the fact that he can be the fixer. But God doesn't want to be the fixer. He wants to be and is the source, whether we agree with him or not. And my prayer eventually got to the point of where I was not praying, God, fix this, God, do this for me, but more of saying, God, I know that you've given me everything that you've given me. Sometimes I feel like it's not enough. Let me realize that it is. If you end up blessing me with a different job or more pay or whatever, I want to make sure that I praise you with that and steward that more effectively than I did in the past. God, I want to recognize you as the source, not as the fix. Do you see the difference? Both, on some level, get to the same ends. But one is asking God and realizing that he's the source. The other one is asking him to change and be something that he's not for my benefit. And that's difficult, especially in a world today where it's about us and it's about me. Before we look at the final thought for today, I just want to say this. I hope you guys are ready for the next 7 weeks. We're going to jump into the I am statements that Jesus Christ said, and they're going to be amazing. We are going to take a little bit of a break next week for the Global Partnership Conference. If you haven't taken a look at that yet, please take a look, and we would love for you to be a part of any night or any time that you can be with that. But that's this week. We got a lot going on Wednesday with childcare. We have a lot going on Saturday with the second Saturday worship and everything like that. But I'm so I'm excited to delve into these I am statements of Jesus, because everything that we've just talked about who God is and what he is, man, that's Jesus too. That's our friend. That's the God who came down in flesh form and walked this earth so that he could say, I know what it feels like to be you. But man, he did it, so we can too. So what? there's 3 questions I want you to take away. There's probably a lot more, and that's okay, but these 3 are the ones I want you to hone in on. First, do you personally know the I am? We talked about this early, where God knows and sees you, but the big question is, do you know him? Do you know this I am? And I would just like to say, whether you're watching online or here in person, if you don't know him, don't wait. He's too good to miss. And if you're in this audience and want to see me after or want to see one of the other elders, man, we would love to talk with you about what that could look like and what that is. But don't be afraid. God is waiting with open arms to welcome you back into his presence. Second question, we talked about this too. What are you doing to be an access point for I am? Man, I hear stories from you guys about going to the fair, going to different markets, going to just being in life of your neighbors, in your workplace, reading the stories from the Old Testament and sharing the good news with them. You guys are doing a ton. But maybe there's something more that God is asking you to do. Maybe there's something different that God is asking you to do. Maybe you've said no too long and it's time to take that step out and know that it's not going to always feel good. It's not always going to be where it's like, this is great. But man, at the end of the day, you're going to know that it was good. And then I think for all of us that know Christ, whereas I am asking to be the source in your life. If you're anything like me, you've done a pretty good job of having certain areas, giving it to him and saying, God, you are the source for this. But if you're anything like me, you're also holding back a few. Wondering if he's good enough, if he's strong enough, if he's merciful or graceful enough to really do that for you. And let me tell you that he is. Because he is I am. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for today. I was greatly aware of the fact that there is no way that I could do you justice in 40 minutes. And I just wanted to kind of whet people's appetite to the I am. And I pray that that's what I did. I pray that you are glorified. My prayer is that we allow your Spirit to come into our hearts, and that these aren't just words that we hear, but these are things that we want to change in our life, and that we take the necessary steps to do so. We love you. We do love you. Even when our actions and our minds don't always point to that, or when our feelings can't wrap ourselves around the fact that we love you. Man, we love you. So help us to make those changes that we need to make. Help us to set aside ourselves and allow you to enter us in such a powerful way that we'll have even more stories to celebrate next week because of the power and the greatness that you are, because you are I am. We ask these things in your precious name. Amen. You guys will stand for a final word. I thought about reading Revelation 4 and 5, which are amazing, by the way. I would challenge you to do that, but I just went with, at the end of Hebrews, it says this, not all of Hebrews, Hebrews 4. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. We do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. He is there waiting for us. Thank you for worshiping with us today. May you feel the presence, peace, and power of I am as you go about his work this week. God bless.